Hi all, welcome to our webinar today, or if you're choosing to watch it recorded later, we hope we'll have some good information for you today. I'm Lynette Harris. I'm a writer, editor, publication specialist, and do media relations for the College of Agriculture and Applied Sciences and for the Utah Agricultural Experiment Station. And as our email said that went out about this, I've been here a long time, even before there was social media. We're having some sound troubles. We're just checking. We're good? Okay. And Aubrey Thomas on our team is here helping today too. If you have any questions as we're going along, you can please use the Q&A button at the bottom and put your questions in. If you have questions later, you can always email me. Before I was here in the College of Ag and Applied Sciences, I was in the university's Utah State University's Central PR and Marketing Office, and I've always covered agriculture, and then I covered the College of Science and Engineering too. So most of my work has been about communicating research. And so we're going to talk about a few things, and you could honestly go to like a whole boot camp about how to do this or whole workshops. So we're just going to touch on a few things today. First of all, we want to talk about, science communication. Hold on, I'm just having a little trouble advancing. There we go. So why do it? It does take your time and energy, and I know you're all very busy. So we'll talk about a few reasons. One, some people do it for their ego. There's nothing wrong with that, but if that's the only reason you're doing it, I'm pretty sure you'll be exhausted fairly quickly. And it can be really frustrated. Now, that doesn't mean that I think good scientists should be shrinking violets and just work quietly and only talk to their peers. There are a lot of reasons for us to educate other people. I think we're all educators, you are all educators here, our faculty, in different forums. And I think if you just think of media and the tools that we have at our disposal at the university as just another way to educate people. Especially, I think it's important for people to understand that science is not a class. It is all around them. And a lot of people will say like, well, I'm not good at math or I'm not good at science, but science is everywhere. It's not separate from their lives. And I think it's really important to remind people of that. I think we're especially fortunate in the College of Ag and Applied Sciences because so much of what we do impacts people on a daily basis. We have issues of food insecurity and nutrition and food safety, animal health, human health, personal finance, genetically modified organisms, vaccines, climate change. We have a lot of really hot button issues that lend themselves to really trying to help people understand large issues. And that gets to the next point about it really does help empower people and helps them to create or demand better policy. I'm fully aware there are some really loud voices that are very skeptical of science. And while I don't think you'll ever overshout them, I think most of the people in the world really are just looking for good information that can help them make an educated decision. And that's sometimes really hard to find. So we want to make that easier for them and help them navigate their lives. Another reason you might need to talk to someone other than your peers is for funding issues, especially at a state-supported university. We have to make cases to state agencies, to the state legislature, to our congressional delegation, and all kinds of other groups that affect our funding. So that, I think, becomes part of everybody's job too. So just to get started, first, you need to think of who is your audience. That is the primary thing to think of. It helps you craft your message. Are you speaking, you're very familiar mostly to speak with other researchers, other people in your field. That is academics' sort of home ground, and they're very comfortable there. Are you speaking to scientists in another discipline though, to do interdisciplinary work? Even that can be a little tricky. And are you talking to a group of maybe prospective students who are touring your lab or their parents? That's a completely different audience. A lot of times people will say they just want to talk to the general public, or we'll get a project request that says their audience is the general public. There's a little problem with that, and we can talk about that a little later. But really, there's no such thing as just a general audience. People, especially now, consume information in a lot of places that are very specialized. And so the next thing you need to think about is, what is your message? And it can't be 30 pages of data if you're looking to communicate with a broader audience. What is your message? You need to boil it down to really the most important key parts and explain why those matter to other people. We'll talk a little more about the so what and who cares a little bit later, but think of why the work that you're doing is important and who needs to hear about it, and get down to that really crystal of that message. That also helps determine what medium are you going to use. We have a lot of opportunities now that didn't exist just even a few years ago. There are still newspapers, believe it or not, there are still newspapers, and people who say nobody reads print have not looked at all of the things that we keep writing that are on the internet. There's more to read now than ever before, but there also are blogs, and we have social media accounts. Either you have personal ones, we have ones for the college, for Extension and the School of Veterinary Medicine. There are so many channels out there, podcasts where you could be a guest or try and start your own podcast. So the medium also needs, the message and the medium really govern the kind of tools that you need. And a lot of times, you know, we'd get a speaker who's really well known in your kind of, in your discipline, in your niche audience, and you think the world should know, and probably there are people on campus who should know, but you're likely not going, we're not going to alert the media and get TV here unless you've got like the president or someone who's very famous to be here, especially for a talk. Talking heads do not make great television. There are things we can do with video and with radio interviews. So there are ways to do that, but just really think about your message, and that helps determine the medium. Now, like I said, people will say our audience is the general public. Well, envision, if you will, that you're telling your story to a person, not to the masses. That really helps you be a better storyteller. And so many of the communication avenues that we use now are really in a niche. People come there because they're interested in nutrition, or they come there because they're interested in natural resource use. And so they can take a little more in-depth information. But part of the problem with thinking of a general public is that you don't really get to the information clearly that people need. And if there's a problem on the consumption side though too, I will put in a plug now for you to go look at some websites and some places with maybe dissenting opinions from the ones that you have, because it can be very enlightening to see what the other people are shouting about if you're in science. And we get so hyper into our niches that we're just there in the echo chamber of people who agree with us. And that doesn't mean we can't put information out there, but I think it's important, especially if you're working in an area where there's some controversy, that you know what people are saying so you can address those things. Next, we say the so what. And if you're talking to people, you want to get to that so what early on. And I don't mean so what and who cares in any kind of way that puts down the work that you do. It's just, you have got to get to that idea early of telling people why the work that you're doing and that you're talking about right now is important to them and what it can do for them. Getting to using the avoiding jargon and excessive acronyms. We all use jargon in whatever your career is, whatever your job is. Every group, every kind of tribe has their own jargon. And that's shorthand for people in the group and can be really effective. But for people outside that group, it's very off-putting. It makes it difficult for them to understand what you're saying, and can even make people feel like they're stupid and there's no point, and you don't want to turn people off. So being able to explain things in simple words, and also in acronyms. I know we're immersed in a world of acronyms, but really, unless you're dealing with the FBI, USDA, or NASA, you can't just use an acronym and expect people to know what it is. So especially in written communication, be sure that you write those out on the first reference so you don't lose people. Using analogies and visuals is really important for speaking to audiences that are not in your discipline, even more so than when you're presenting at a meeting and have visuals. But those need to be different kinds of visuals. You're not going to use every graph and chart that you would maybe, or table that you have in, say, a publication that you're sending a manuscript to. But there are ways to do better visuals that really help explain that. We have some great graphic designers in our team here, in the marketing communications team, who can help with creating some of those visuals, and there's some really great online resources. And you know, we've all been in meetings where you saw some graphs, some charts and things that really worked, and we've all been in meetings where we saw some that really didn't. So be sure that you're thinking through the audience again, and we always recommend when you're doing those, hand them off to someone to not just proofread, although that's important, but hand them to someone and see if they can make sense of them, or if there's something that really is kind of baffling or that they think could be a little better. There is a Dilbert cartoon from long ago that I have always loved, where he's, you know, it says physics made easy, and he's talking about time being the lesson. So he says, imagine a donut fired from a cannon at the speed of light while it's rotating, and time is like that, except without the cannon and the donut. If that's the best analogy you can come up with, just don't. So there are great ways to do analogies, though, that really help your audience. One that I read recently, a plant scientist who had a column in Scientific American talked about that she had a presentation to make to an audience of non-scientists about her work. And it was about, you know, when plants become stressed by drought or they're being eaten by an insect, that they release chemicals that become essentially like a call for help, that are interpreted by insects and other microbes in the soil. And then her work focuses on understanding what those signals are and how, if you interrupted those, you may be able to minimize crop losses to pests. So her talk was really, she said, volatile organic compounds as multitrophic messages of plants, microbes, and insects. She got it down to 911 calls that go out from plants, insects, and soil microbes. That was her analogy. People can understand a 911 call as a call for distress, and made that a lot more accessible, approachable to them than the way she would explain it to her peers. Now, everybody has a lot going on, so and these are not the hard, fast rules of all of the ways that we weigh something, whether a story is newsworthy. And we have so many different outlets now that most things we can find a place for. If it's on social media or a press release, sometimes if it's something that's been kind of visual, we send out what we call a media alert, where it's not a full press release, but we let them know something that's going on in your area that we think would make a good story. So first of all, these are some pointers from the American Geophysical Union's page that's all about science communication. And I'll give you a link to that at the end of the webinar. So did you find something that was new or previously unknown in your field? That makes it a newsworthy item. Again, we'll look at where that should go. Does the work significantly advance your field of study? Is it about something that impacts daily life for your listeners and readers, not just for you and the people in your lab? That's one place that I think the College of Agriculture really gets to shine, because we do a lot of work that does impact people's on subjects that impact people's daily life. Is it related to current events? That, if there are news stories going on, it doesn't mean we're cheapening your work in any way by tying it to something that already has people's attention in the news. We use that as a hook to sort of hang the story on, that it's something people are already talking about. For example, when there was flooding in Texas a few years ago and some really extreme weather, we had some great placement of stories from our Utah Climate Center faculty who had built models that were predicting those things and projecting that those really extreme weather events would continue, and gave some of the reasons why. So that gave them some great attention because flooding was going on not only in Texas, but in other parts of the country as well. So that becomes a great hook. Now, I will say, when those went up on some of the newspapers' websites, there were some, you know, in the comments section, I would just say, read the comments on a story if you really, really want to, but there are always going to be trolls that say negative things. And in this case, of course, because it was about climate, there were people with some really with some very negative comments on the newsfeed of a particular newspaper. And when I said something about it to one of the researchers, he just said, well, people in Texas hate it when you tell them climate change is real. So be ready for some backlash if there are some of those topics. But looking at current events can really be a thing that helps leverage your message. Next is, does it go against a current consensus? Is what you found in your research something that really turns a convention on its head? And that could be a really important thing for people to know. And last, do you have good photos or video? That's becoming increasingly important. We can't post a picture on our website. We can't send a story to Utah State Today for the university's news site without at least 2 photographs. And the brilliant thing is almost everyone has a camera in their pocket now with their phone. And while our staff can't be everywhere, you are in your labs, you're in doing field work, you're working with students. There are a lot of places that we get great photos. It's another way we feel really fortunate to be in the College of Agriculture and Applied Sciences, because we have so many visual opportunities for photographs and for video. We've got animals and plants and chemistry labs and kitchens and airplanes and CAD drawings and models of landscape architecture plans. We've got a lot of great things to get pictures of. And we're not putting down our people who are neighbors here on the Logan campus, but we often say, thank goodness we're not the Huntsman School, because how many pictures of people in business clothes in a meeting do you really need? But we have a lot of opportunities here. So be thinking of visuals. It was great just several weeks ago, one of our researchers in animal science had collaborators here from out of state who were working on a project and knew they had a new funding request in, and so she contacted us to come get photos while they were here, so we would have them when the new funding announcement came out. That's not something that's really present on everybody's mind, and if you didn't call ahead of time to tell us, that's fine, but we can't write about stuff we don't hear about. And get photos when you're in action. A lot of times, thankfully, we have a lot of student groups who get awards for their work on some really great projects. But what we often find is we hear about it, and we have a lot of faculty who get awards too. We hear about those things like after or maybe just prior to a national meeting or some other place where they're getting the award. And we get these not very great grip and grin photos with bad lighting, and they're handing over a certificate or a trophy. And really the story was the process, like what did they do to get there? That's the part that's really engaging. We can hang that on the fact that they got the award, and it's nice to say we got an award, but what we really want to do is tell those stories of what they did, especially when students are involved, the opportunities that that gave them and the things that they learned. And the great pictures are when they're developing the new food product or when they're working on the new landscape design. And I will also put in a plug, if you're ever in charge of a meeting where they're giving awards, do every public affairs person a favor and pay attention to what the background looks like where people are getting their pictures taken, and that there's some lighting that is flattering, unlike the lighting we have in here today. But really, pictures are increasingly important, and video. And I'm really, one of my jobs here is to do, I edit the college's alumni magazine and work with the School of Veterinary Medicine's alumni magazine. So both Cultivate in the college and the university's alumni magazine are trying to have enhanced content for every issue. So we'll have video online on the magazine's website that we can direct people to. So be thinking of those ideas, things that can make great video. We have a lot of ideas, but we don't know everything. Okay, moving on to working with the media. Part of our job in this office is to do media outreach and try and connect reporters, journalists, people with podcasts, all kinds of things with our faculty who have things going on. So one of the things we need to talk about, and when you want us to pitch something, is really thinking about, again, audience. It always starts there. Who needs to know this? Because that helps us determine where it goes. And media can really be anything from a newspaper reporter to a broadcaster to a documentary filmmaker. There are all kinds of outlets. Don't think of the press as our messengers. They don't work for us. We don't order them to show up at an event. It's not like ordering pizza. We can pitch an idea to local and often to regional and national outlets, depending on the story and how we think, and finding specific writers. There are some really great science writers out there that subjects really work for them, and I do homework to see what kinds of topics different writers tend to gravitate to, and would know if you have, for example, a paper coming out in a really prestigious journal, we'll work on sending something out on Eureka Alert and some other ways to reach them and go directly to some of them as well. But the journalists that you might get here, when I started in this job, at least speaking in the Salt Lake market, the Salt Lake Tribune, the Deseret News, KSL, and Channel 4 all had science writers, science specialists. That was their beat. Those positions don't exist there anymore. Newsrooms have gotten very streamlined, so the journalists that you work with are especially locally, are mainly generalists. Now, if you're being interviewed by someone from, say, a national news outlet, National Public Radio, or some such thing, they do have journalists working for them who are science writers and science broadcasters. So they have a little more, maybe better comfort level with some of the terms that you'll use and have more experience asking those kinds of questions to shape a research-based story. What we decide to pitch often depends on, and timing when we pitch things is also really important. Some of it, we don't want to send out a pitch or a press release on something we think can be a great story on like Friday afternoon, because we need you to be available should they decide to pursue a story and go beyond just what we've sent them. And so timing is really important. We need to look at what other things are happening in the world that day. And we can't always predict that, of course, but there are things you can look at and know, like, this is not going to be the day to try and pull a reporter, especially up to Logan. They're getting, I don't know, it goes back and forth. Sometimes I feel like they think Salt Lake is miles and miles from Logan and they'd have to pack a lunch to even come here. But we do get reporters coming up, and we've got some good relationships with reporters in Salt Lake that we keep working on. And sometimes you can do everything right, or think you've got it right, and you've pitched the story and you've got the visuals and it's all going to work great, and then things that you cannot control happen. A great example of this was several years ago. It was a landmark anniversary of the Wright brothers flight, and engineering students here at Utah State built a model of the Wright Flyer out of modern materials, and it was going around to air shows, and it was just a great tool for talking about engineering and kind of hanging it on the excitement of that landmark anniversary. And one of the big media events that the university planned was the plane went out to a place where it could fly. We had a former Utah senator who had been an astronaut to pilot the plane. It was a beautiful day. It was sunny and gorgeous. It went flawlessly. They had all the Salt Lake media there watching it. And as the plane took off and there was cheering and these students were so excited, and my colleague said, and yay, it's a slow news day. It was in the middle of the week. And 2 hours later, Elizabeth Smart, who had been kidnapped months before from her home in Salt Lake, was found in Salt Lake City. And the Wright Flyer story ended up being like 60 seconds 3 days later on a couple of the newscasts. They're just things we can't control. On the other hand, Janet Anderson, who is on our nutrition, dietetics, and food sciences faculty, presented a paper at a meeting of food technologists, and a reporter was there who was looking for kind of food-based stories, and Janet's talk was about an observational study they had done about people's food handling in their home. She does a lot of work training people for restaurant food handling, but they had done this story and found that people really were not very careful about food safety and cross-contamination in their own kitchens. And the journalist wrote this story. That was fine. Janet didn't think too much of it. She talked to the reporter and they had it in. And the next day that had hit the news wire and it checked all those boxes. It was something that was really relatable to people. Everybody, I think, either has experienced a foodborne illness or has someone in their family has. And you're cooking and you're wondering about how you're handling things. So it had great impact and really broad appeal. And all of a sudden, the PR office, we spent 2 days on the phone trying to schedule interviews for her and other people in the study. We had news crews coming in. We were scheduling where they could go. We ended up in Janet's kitchen at her home because we needed a home kitchen. And ultimately, people on that study were flown to New York to be on the Today Show and Good Morning America. And she never expected that. None of us expected it. We didn't even know she was presenting at that meeting. But so it just is something we can't predict. But we can do our best to try and pitch it at the right time to the right people. The other thing you need to understand is that journalists and researchers live in, I like to say, parallel universes. Researchers are very methodical. Your work does not go at the speed of light. You work on things for years and years. You crunch data for a long time. You're really immersed in this subject. And a journalist has 2 stories to do that day and another deadline looming at noon, and they need the story now. And so there are ways to deal with that and kind of bring those 2 together. It doesn't mean that journalists are not careful with their work, and you can do some things that really help to get the story done well. So let's talk about when the media come calling. One thing you need to know, especially if you're in a discipline where there may be something controversial that comes up, and a reporter may call you directly, find you on just doing a search and seeing papers. They may contact me or the university's public affairs office trying to find someone who can talk about this. If they just call you in your office, we don't want you to be curt with them, but also you're not obligated to drop everything and talk to them that second. It's fine to say, ask them to tell you more about sort of what the story is that they're after, so that you can be prepared. Tell them up front, I can't talk to you right now, but I could talk to you sometime later today. Asking when is your deadline for having interviews done is important, and really try to work with them on that. Also find out if they'll talk a little more about what it is that they're working on. You may determine that really you're not the one to talk about it, and you could recommend someone else who is. Now, we talk about sort of levels of expertise, and people in academia are very, you get very focused on maybe a real niche of your discipline, and that is your specialty. And at a professional meeting, that is what you would talk about, is just that. Journalists, again, are generalists, and you are still an expert in that area and have something to contribute. So I'm not saying go off the rails talking about things that are not in your area, but you have a lot to talk about, a lot that you can help educate people about, even though it's not very specific to what you do. That said, we always say an expert for the Herald Journal is not the same as an expert for the Salt Lake Tribune, when you've got more statewide audience, is not the same thing as an expert for the Washington Post. So we try and gauge, the size of the outlet, but don't be afraid to talk about things in your area. You can provide context to help a journalist understand the examples that you're giving or your opinions, but know that really nothing is off the record. And that's just something I would never advise you to say. Don't be afraid to show your passion and excitement when you're talking with media, and especially if you're on camera. You want to be animated. You want people to understand why you care about this, and hopefully explain to them why you hope they will care. I remember, I'm kind of a space nerd from earlier work that I did, and I remember watching a live feed at NASA when this mission had landed on Mars. It was a big deal. It was a project that had gone on for years, and these people, like, it had been their career to get these landers ready to go, and they landed, and one of the engineers, you know, a journalist asked a question like, how's it feeling today? And he was so blasé about, it's very rewarding, very exciting. He could not have sounded less excited. And I was just stunned. And so don't be afraid to show people that this is exciting stuff. Nobody, like him, or you may not, nobody watches Bill Nye the Science Guy because he's really calm and blasé about things. Then, especially in a time, the next one, where we say, answer the question and then stop talking. We get very uncomfortable with silence, especially if there's a camera rolling or a microphone in front of you. It's just a natural reaction to think, well, I need to fill this space. But especially if you're commenting on something that is kind of controversial, say what you're going to say and then stop talking. They can ask you another question. The more concise you are, the less likely you are to be sort of misquoted. You'll be more memorable if you give a concise answer. Think of, again, I don't mean to dumb this down, think of your message and think of some kind of phrases that we would call like mental bumper stickers. Very short, with a good action word, and something that can stick in people's minds. That's what they'll remember from the whole story, most likely. Sound bites sometimes get a bad name. People have bad perceptions about a sound bite, but really that is what people remember. So think of your message in those terms of how you can really crystallize things. Another thing you can do is give them some cues, like the really surprising thing we found is, and go on, or raise a little flag that says the important thing to remember about this is. Those kind of things really help too. Also understand, when we do stories here on campus and we are your voice, we will send things back to you to read and to clarify. We'll work on different versions of it. Know that we need to keep those things moving along. They can't sit in your email for a week, but you do get to go back over things. Be aware when you're proofreading something, especially, so if you're proofreading something that you've written that's a longer story we're sending out, reading your quotes, you may want to change things here and there, and that's all right. But be aware that you don't speak the same way that you would write that. And sometimes when people write a quote, or we'll even ask you maybe to just email us a quote we can plug in somewhere, be aware that you don't write the same way that you speak. And if we put that in as a quote, it can sound very stilted and unnatural. So look at things as dialogue, not like written prose. With a journalist outside, you can offer to review the parts of the story that pertain to you, or to proofread things, but you can't demand that. You can ask, you can offer, but that's about as far as you can go with asking to see it before it's published or before it's run. Then, so which medium and tools to use? If the message requires a lot of explanation and background, there are ways to do that with video that can be interesting, but a lot of those really lend themselves to written stories like newspaper stories and blog and longer blog posts and that kind of thing. It's important to, again, crystallize those ideas. I've had a researcher on campus who said, she had a paper accepted at a really nice journal, and she was a little, I don't know, skeptical, or put out that in addition to her abstract with the paper, they wanted her to write a tweet about her manuscript that they could use to promote it on their Twitter feed. And I just think it's important to understand that is an important tool. Social media is an important communications tool. We're not going to run your whole story on Facebook, but we will run an image and give people a little explanation in a very short, just a few sentences, and then link them to more information. So if somebody asks you to turn yours into a tweet, don't be put out. We are not belittling your work. It's just, you really need to crystallize your thoughts. And, you know, Twitter used to be 140 characters. Now it's up to 280. But you should also know that historically, 9% of tweets, only 9% hit that 140 character limit. Most are much shorter. So it really helps you to think through and, again, crystallize your thoughts. Think through what the pictures are. That's critical for television. We have a YouTube channel that we post a lot of our own videos on because we're related with the Extension Communications Office. There are a lot of extension videos out there, but we're looking to do more and more in the college. When I say beware of the dragons that must be fed, which like blogs, social media accounts, your own Facebook page, or your own YouTube channel, people can get very excited, especially if you're on a project that is, you know, multidisciplinary and has some really great applied research findings to give someone. People get very excited about wanting to have their own social media presence. We're not saying don't do that necessarily, but those are things that require constant feeding of new information, new pictures, new links to other outside information sources, and you have to be committed to doing that or it just languishes. And it looks worse because you haven't posted anything in 2 months when people get on there. It is easier for you probably and better for us and the college as a whole if you send us some of that information and pictures and we use it on our existing college channels, and that just amplifies the message. And if you're in a professional society that maybe you showed up on one of their social media channels related to a conference or a paper, let us know about those, because we're not following everyone in the world, but we could link to some of those if we know they're out there. In the CAS Communications Office, again, we're not a huge shop and we can't be everywhere. So please let us know about things that are going on and in enough time for us to actually do something about it. And just thinking about what are the stories, the real stories. And we're, again, trying to get to that idea of the process and what our students and our faculty learn here. It's nice if there was a poster session that students did, but just we had a poster session on Thursday at 2 and there were 50 students. That really doesn't tell anybody anything. We want to talk about what did they learn? What were a few of those projects about and get behind them. So that takes a little time. It also requires faculty members or those students to be responsive and give us the information we need to be able to do those posts. We are right now working with our college's new Associate Dean for Research, Abby Benninghoff, on a new CAS research website. And among the things on there will be kind of a toolbox with some science communication tools. And also it will give us places where perhaps you kind of toyed with the idea of writing blog posts related to your research, but you're worried about, again, feeding that blog, feeding that dragon all the time. We're looking at places where we could have, you know, guest essays, blog posts from people. We can create short videos that will live there. And also we want a calendar of when you have graduate students who are defending their theses and all kinds of events like that. Often you don't even know, we're all so busy, and you may hear what a colleague is doing in a faculty meeting, but you may not. And especially a colleague who's in a different department or a different college, especially in a different department, because we'll focus on the College of Ag and Applied Sciences. But we just want that to be kind of a hub that really lets us show our research off. And then So I just wanted to share a few of, there are some great online tools. And again, there are places you can go and do whole day or several days of media training and in science communication. Some of these online sources are really useful. The American Geophysical Union's Sharing Science pages have some great information on them. The Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science has videos. They come and do workshops. We've had them here doing workshops before. Scientific American, their blog is a really good place, I think, to look at ways that people are communicating with an interested but lay audience. Certainly there are scientists who go there and read those, and definitely who write those, but the public are just, they're interested in science generally, but they're not specialists usually, and that's not their career necessarily. So some of those blog posts are really good for helping you understand how other people are synthesizing the work that they do and writing it for different audiences. And then Brown University has an online quick guide to science communication that I just created a shorter URL for that, but it's something you can print out if you want to. The American Geophysical Union, whether you're in one of the disciplines that is part of that association or not, they're just really good general science communication tips. And there are even printable sheets that you can use to sort of gather your thoughts and be ready to do an interview or contact us, or when a journalist calls you, that help you kind of get your head around the message that you really want to reinforce. So thanks so much for all that you do. You make this a remarkable place for us to be able to work and tell these stories. And please be in touch with us. On the CAS homepage, at the bottom of it, you'll find a navigation link that says marketing. And under that, there's a project request link where you can send in specific projects. We'll put more and more tools there. If maybe you don't need us to broadcast it to the world, but you have a speaker series that you want up on all the screens all over on campus, we can help you with that too. So go there, and soon we'll be launching the research website. We hope to see your stories there. Thanks.